think we're going to have to use it. I don't think we actually have an option not to use it. You know, in your introduction, you said we don't have enough people coming through the talent pipeline. The immediate solution to that talent pipeline is better utilization of technology, which means the executive said that, you know, as a tier one, we've spent years and years and years just hunting these, you know, multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar projects. But what that means for our workforce is everyone's working in their lane. They all have an exact role on the project. They do that job. When the job gets hard, they get burnt out and they leave. And he said that the new business strategy that they're looking into at the higher up level is actually construction has a huge mental health crisis. And when, you know, we got an opportunity for innovation, the first thing we did was
we're at a turning point. The next generation is here with fresh perspectives, bold ideas, and a drive to build a more sustainable future. But are we giving them the opportunity to step up? Engineering and construction are the backbone of our world, yet these industries face a critical challenge: an ageing workforce, supply chains that need urgent decarbonisation, and a talent pipeline that isn't keeping up. If we don't invest in developing a big capability today, who will build the solutions of tomorrow? Enter Carina, a leader who's not just engineering projects, but engineering change. She's tackling the challenge of decarbonisation of supply chains and proving that sustainability and industry can go hand in hand. She's also a passionate advocate for young professionals, recognising that the next generation holds the key to transforming an ageing workforce. But with Gen Z redefining work, demanding purpose, flexibility, and more innovation from us, how can the industries evolve to attract and retain the talent they need? Welcome to the Building Doors podcast, Carina.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Look, I was super pumped when we were talking about some of the topics we were going to discover and talk about in the episode. But I want you to start off with telling us a little bit about you and your career. So before we get into talking about some of the key themes, how did you get here?
Okay. I love that. What's my career story? And I think it starts almost through my childhood, because I actually think that's something that Gen Zs are incredibly fond of. We love aligning our careers with our core values and how we were raised. And I was raised in the Torres Strait Islands in far north Queensland. So I spent pretty much my whole life growing up on the Great Barrier Reef. And,
tough.
Swimming through all that beautiful coral. And I remember kind of transitioning through my teenage years into, university eventually. But I mean, the sea levels are rising, the coral's dying, and it's just heartbreaking that my children won't be able to have the same experience that I had growing up. I think I've always had an incredibly strong desire to be part of those sustainable solutions in the future. When I, was good at math and science at high school, they recommended I become an engineer. Through university, engineering is a lot of theory, a lot of math, and a lot of group assignments. I think the only thing that actually probably prepares you most for an engineering career and a career in construction is probably those group assignments, let's be honest. I think ultimately I was raised to, have sustainability as one of my core values. And I remember my mother used to tell me, not to turn the aircon on because the penguins would die, and Happy Feet had just come out. So I was very passionate about penguins. So I feel like there was never even a question of, will I transfer into this career role? It was just such a core part of my identity and who I am as a person. So
I want to talk about what we've spoken about in the past is, what are the challenges we're going to face with an ageing workforce? And what are some of the things we can do to combat that?
Mm-hmm. I think, so this is one of the first times in history we've actually had 5 generations in the workforce. So the generational differences are quite intertwined. But you've got your Gen Zs coming in and you've got your baby boomers starting to exit. Everyone values things differently. We've all grown up in very different societies, and transitioning kind of from those Gen Zs to the baby boomers is incredibly complicated. Gen Zs were raised with the internet. We had information at our fingertips. We, didn't ever really actually have to sit down and troll through textbooks. We could quickly Google something if we wanted to know what it was. Our baby boomers and our Gen X colleagues, they are so good at, understanding information, finding information, but they're also incredibly slow at it. Gen Zs like to be a little bit faster. And I think that's going to reflect a lot as we transition, the millennials into kind of middle management, and the Gen Zs are coming up underneath them. The thing I think that will change so much of that is around the transfer of knowledge. So how I learn is very different to how my grandparents learn. And they only just retired, my grandparents. So, there's people, close my parents' age who are in the workforce. The way they are going to have to teach me information is very different to how they would have learned from their peers. I might trust sources on the internet more than I'll trust, a human being in front of me, just because of the technology I grew up with. I think transfer of knowledge in, an industry which has to be so concerned around, safe outcomes, especially in engineering design and construction, is going to be so important, because as we transition into new fuels, new gases, solar panels, we're going to have safety needs to be, so key to all of that, and safe design, safe practices, because if we have an incident, if there's, a nuclear energy incident, we destroy our future.
Yeah. So stakes are high, right?
Stakes are high. Yeah.
Something someone mentioned to me around AI and utilizing AI to improve productivity in construction, renewables, infrastructure. One of the things they said is a barrier is safety, and being able to, if something occurs, being able to explain why decisions were made if technology is used. What are your thoughts around that? The how we use tech, because obviously you've come up and grown up on technology. How do we use that without putting ourselves at risk with the human element side of it?
I think we're going to have to use it. I don't think we actually have an option not to use it. In your introduction, you said we don't have enough people coming through the talent pipeline. The immediate solution to that talent pipeline is better utilization of technology, which means we need the right people designing that technology, programming the artificial intelligence. And we need systems in place that do allow that human being element to oversee it. I think it's really fascinating. We joke, in my workplace about ChatGPT replacing some of our young engineers, because the ChatGPT isn't replacing the older engineers who are, checking off on the drawings. It's replacing the young workforce who are ready to learn. And then they're also identifying that they can get their jobs done faster by utilizing that technology. So the depth of their knowledge isn't as secure as it is in those older workforces. And I think that's probably a huge risk, is you're not only promoting the use of it now whilst we don't completely understand it, but young people are drawn towards using it because it makes them appear more productive, more capable.
Yeah.
And the people, upper management don't know the difference.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it is a little bit like that. If you've got a graduate engineer who can do the job of 3 graduate engineers, you're like, great, awesome, you're promoted.
Absolutely. So that leans into something we've spoken about before that I want to understand. So if we know this is going to be a problem, we know we've got an aging workforce that's going to be leaving, how do we get the generations coming through to be starting to see the new way of building projects, to be more involved so that we future-proof the industry?
Thought about this a lot, and I was at a lunch yesterday with some executives in a construction company, and one of their young leaders actually asked that question of them, like, how are they going to retain young people in their workforce? And this executive came up with such a brilliant solution to it. And I was kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And it was, the executive said that as a tier one, we've spent years and years and years just hunting these, multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar projects. But what that means for our workforce is everyone's working in their lane. They all have an exact role on the project. They do that job. When the job gets hard, they get burnt out and they leave.
Mm.
And he said that the new business strategy that they're looking into at the higher up level is actually moving away from those billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar projects, because they've identified that as an executive cohort, the parts in their career where they learnt the most and developed the quickest and were excited to turn up to work every day was when they were on a medium, small-sized job, but they were given lots of responsibility because they were young people in their organization. They had to do 3 roles at the same time, but it was a small job. So, they could safely learn, they could fail because the stakes weren't, high, and there weren't contracts and, legal chasing them for everything. And so they're actually thinking about rewriting their business strategy to focus more on medium and small projects.
Yep.
To ensure that their young workforce can start developing quicker so that they can start developing and not get burnt out. And so that they actually have that new group coming through to be the executives in the future. I went, that's great, because I think my company does a lot of that as well at GPA. Like, we focus on a lot of medium to small jobs, and it has given people like me the ability to learn a lot really fast and being pushed beyond my comfort zone, but always having those leaders to, call and back me when I, didn't quite know. And I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity if I'd, grown up on a $1 billion project. I got that opportunity because I've delivered, $1 million projects and tens of $1 million projects. And I just thought that was so interesting because it's around changing your business strategy to focus on developing and retaining your young people. Yeah.
And one of the things you touched on there, which I found really fascinating through when we talk about psychological safety at work, and the relationship between that and the ability to innovate.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a billion dollar project, the stakes are high. If there's a mistake, you're going to be less inclined to try new things, new innovative ways of doing things if you're in that sort of environment. But this is the very time that we need to find better ways of doing things, improving productivity. So I love it. It's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to, well, what if all the companies, all the tier ones, all the big dogs just decided they're going to start delivering medium-sized projects so that they can, retain and upskill their workforce? What if they just decided that one day? Then the pressure almost goes back on the government to say, well, we need to reconsider our entire contracting strategy. Because right now we, pass our risk on to the big tier ones.
Yes.
In the $1 billion projects that go for years and years and years and years. And we get burnt out, they get burnt out, and, delays happen.
You mentioned to me when we were talking the other day, and I want to touch on it because it's cool. No other reason, really. You mentioned there was and obviously you can't divulge a whole lot, but a Japanese project you were working on where you got to try some cool new stuff.
Yeah.
For the engineers all listening, I know you want to hear about cool engineering stuff. Tell me a little bit about that project, because that was the opportunity where you got to try something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very fortunate in when I started in my workplace, there was a project that just came in, and it was almost an idea on a page. It was a Japanese company had approached us, and they wanted to develop a methyl cyclohexane supply chain between Australia and Japan. And, for those listening who don't know what methyl cyclohexane is, or MCH, it's a hydrogen energy project, or a green hydrogen energy project, and it solves the hydrogen storage and transport issue. So hydrogen is an explosive gas. It's very hard to store. It's very hard to transport because it has to be compressed or stored at really low temperatures in liquefied form. The methyl cyclohexane is essentially a circular supply chain whereby you stitch hydrogen molecules to a chemical called toluene, and you transport, and that becomes methyl cyclohexane. You transport the methyl cyclohexane through to Japan using existing supply chains and infrastructure. So what we currently use for our oil projects, basically drums, barrels, pipelines. In Japan, they use a catalyst to extract the hydrogen out of the methyl cyclohexane, and they return the toluene. So the toluene is kind of this transfer medium that kind of goes back and forward between Australia and Japan, transporting a renewable fuel that Japan can then use. I think what's super fascinating about this project is that it is so strategic. It's partly funded by private companies and partly funded by the Japanese government. But the whole concept around it is about small demonstration plants that slowly get upscaled so that in 40 years, when they build the $1 billion MCH plant that, fuels, part of Japan's transport, they would have learned all the mistakes early on. They would have learned exactly how to maintain the technology. They would have learned exactly the right operating temperatures and pressures to keep things at. And I think what a great experience it's been is I was involved in the very early on plant. So it was very small. It was only, 200 kilowatts of electrolyzer supply. And the next scale of the plant is kind of 2.5 megawatts. The next scale and the next scale, it slowly grows. You slowly use more land and you learn lots and lots and lots of lessons along the way. And what I loved about that was the concept around starting small, learning from all those mistakes, giving your young leaders the opportunity to grow and learn those mistakes alongside you. Because my boss isn't going to be managing, the $1 billion plant in 30 years. He's going to be retired.
Yeah, you will be.
I'm going to be managing.
You sure are.
The $30 billion plant. So why not have me, looking after the tiny little plant at the moment? It just makes complete sense.
It does. And what do you think the barriers are? Why aren't we doing that so often? Like, what do you see that some of the barriers are for us giving our next generation coming through more of these opportunities?
Yeah. I think Australia has, an industry culture of like, go big or go home.
Yeah.
And you can learn so much on those large projects. But you can also just get exhausted on them because they last years. You might only be there for a small part of that project. It is so rare that you'll be there from when it was an idea on the page through to when it's being constructed and commissioned. I don't know what the cultural change is that needs to happen. I think it's almost society wide, but I think part of it and part of what I'm hopeful for is those creative solutions where, what we're doing now might not work. The way we currently supply energy to our large cities is, through power lines, through pipelines, through all this crazy infrastructure, but it's about transporting energy from, one place to another. What some places are looking at in Europe is more around like microgrid infrastructure where it's lots of small little energy hubs. And I think those kind of creative solutions is what we need to start working on and focusing on here in Australia from an infrastructure perspective, because what we've done previously is not going to work for the future. We can't just deliver huge, $1 billion projects, not with the workforce we have.
No. Yeah. I was talking to a project manager I used to work with last night, and he was coming home from the job, and one of the things he said is this is like, it was a water treatment plant, so not a huge job, but he's like, Lauren, the lessons I have learned on this job, he's like, I'm going to stick it right to the end because it's going to be a project that I've done from procurement, delivery, and to the end. He said, I've learned so much more being on this job through everything, managing a team of 25, managing, all of the different moving parts and the changes and being so proactive and thinking of different ways of doing it. I think we overlook the lessons that are often learned on those projects. And maybe we need to make it more attractive, right? The smaller jobs. So what do we need to do then? So Gen Z, we want more engineers, right? Well, we want everybody in construction. I want to be clear with saying as well, it's not just engineering. There's contracts, there's commercial, there's communications. Like the list is legal, the list is endless.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am, it may shock you all to know, I am a millennial. I'm not a Gen Z. I know, despite the youth I hold,
and the pink jacket,
and the pink jacket. I am not a Gen Z.
Yeah.
But what I want to understand is Gen Z coming through. What do we need to do to attract and continue to build capability in the construction infrastructure, renewable industry? What do we need to think of about what – this is a question I get asked all the time about what you're looking for from an employer and a workplace.
Yeah. I think I always feel bad speaking on behalf of all Gen Zs.
It's
I'm on the older level of it.
You're Yoda. No, that's okay. You can be Yoda Gen Z.
Old Gen Z. Yeah, exactly. So I'm not only speaking for me, but I'm speaking for, my 16-year-old cousin who is still in high school and, my siblings who have only just started, working as well. And I think Gen Zs, I think there's two things that, may be different about us. I think a lot of people mistake that we get a bit mixed up with the millennials and craving that work-life balance. I think we've watched our millennial bosses really suffer under the illusion of work-life balance.
What are we talking about? Just kidding.
Yeah. You all just look so tired all the time.
We're exhausted. I mean, we're raising families, running businesses.
Exactly.
I mean,
trying to buy houses.
Come join us.
I would say one thing Gen Zs do look up to in their millennial leadership is the concept of running your own business. I think Gen Zs tend to be more entrepreneurial because we've seen that as a successful way to break the cycle in the millennials. And I think that's really positive. But I think beyond that, Gen Zs are, we're so value driven. We have grown up with social media our whole lives. We align ourselves with people, companies, and brands that relate to our values. Yeah. And so much of that is Gen Zs just won't work at companies that don't align with their values or aren't trying to do something, to help support those values. I think that's a huge part of it is, and I'd, make that suggestion to any Gen Z person listening is, find a company that aligns with your values because you're probably going to have a better time there.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it. I think secondly, Gen Zs are, they want to learn and they want to be involved. And I think the mistake that we make so often with, the young people, it's almost telling them to wait for their opportunity, telling them to, just learn all your technical skills first.
Do your time.
Spend the next 10 years doing your time. ChatGPT is going to do it all for you anyways. Sit there twiddling your thumbs. I think Gen Zs are keen to learn and they're keen to kind of co-create a new industry that works for us. Because I think we've seen with our, millennial friendships that the industry doesn't work for them and the society doesn't work for them. And so I think, Gen Zs are so creative and we're going to come up with plenty of good ideas and, get a Gen Z in your board meetings. I don't know.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, they'll be keen. I guarantee it.
They're
full of it.
I feel like, and they want to be heard.
Yeah.
And ultimately, unless we as an industry are actively promoting that Gen Z has a seat and a voice at the table, then that's not appealing to them.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the word industry there because so much of it is around Gen Z's career hop a lot more often than baby boomers and Gen Xers did. And so it actually becomes less of the responsibility of a company to retain young talent, and it becomes more of the responsibility of the industry to retain that talent. And, we're all working on the same problems together. Sure, there's competitors and, different suppliers, but ultimately a lot of our learnings, a lot of our lessons are shared. You want to try and keep your young workforce at least working in the industry that supports them. Yeah.
So when we look at it as an industry, what do you see around the way it's promoted? And talking just to your friends, talking to other people, your cousins, what are your thoughts around how we promote it and how can we do better?
Yeah. I work in, a lot of my work has to do with oil and gas as well as renewable fuels. So I think that's really fascinating. A lot of my peers actually, they criticize, the fact that you work in oil and gas because they hear from newspapers and from the brands that they're aligned with that, it's all bad for the environment. They're not wrong, but I love the quote around, if you're trying to make a difference at your child's school, you don't go and, walk outside the school with picket fences. You join the PNC.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, there's so many talented young people out there who don't want to join the industries because, they're worried it doesn't align with their values from the outside. But the only way you can make that meaningful change is from the inside. And I think that's something really hard to communicate to my peers and even the next group coming up into the workforce is, the industry and the world that has been left for us. We're going to have to do something about in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Or, it's not going to be left for that next generation. And the messaging's really conflicting because, you hear about future generation bills being banned through Parliament and stuff like that. And it's like, well, how do you convince Gen Zs to care and work and create, in a world where they're not even sure, they'll be there for or be able to hand over.
That's so sad, Carina.
It is really sad. Yeah. But I think it's the truth that a lot of Gen Zs face when, questioning what career they want to take on. And to be honest, the construction industry, you can make a lot of really good money, but the, conditions of work may not be flexible. And if Gen Zs are valuing flexibility because they're worried about not having enough time left, then we need to change to let them come in. Yeah.
One of the things you spoke about that I think is perfect time to bring up as well is it's shifting thinking. Yeah. And what it is there's one thing that I say to companies all the time. You promote your projects, which is great that you do that, but Gen Z wants to see who you are and what you stand for and what they're going to be a part of and how they're going to have a seat at the table. So there's almost this misalignment with people going, but we have great projects. Yeah, we know. We see you promote that. But who are you? What's your ethos? What's your values? What would it be like for me? Do I get a seat at the table if I work there? Those sort of things would shift and make it more attractive. But the other thing is, if we want to be more flexible, we need to rethink, honestly, everything.
Yeah.
Tell me about one of the things you used an example was this mining company and they couldn't find truck drivers. Tell us that story as well.
Yeah.
It was a good one.
It was a news article I read a while ago, but I just saw it and I thought, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And so previously, these truck drivers for dewatering were doing kind of 2 9-hour shifts throughout the day. So, 18 hours split into 2 9-hour shifts. They had a lot of, men driving the trucks. And they realized, they weren't quite getting the output they wanted because, you have to schedule in break times. You have to do all of this stuff. But they realized that the local community in the mining town had a lot of women who, were unemployed and, really wanted to get back into the working environment, really wanted to start, creating a career for themselves. And so they decided to flip what was previously 2 9-hour shifts into 3 6-hour shifts. And what they did is they gave most of the women the middle shift, so between school hours. Yeah. Meanwhile, they got to decrease the breaks they needed. Everyone got paid essentially the equivalent to what they were getting paid, and the output went through the window to the point where they were like, we'd never go back.
Yeah.
And I just loved that as a concept because in construction, I think something we're all so familiar with is the idea of a pre-start. If you're not there for your 6 a.m., your 6:30 pre-start, you're not there for the rest of the day. Yeah. And when we're talking about creating more flexibility in the workforce, when we're talking about wanting this new generation to come in, be upskilled, we need to consider what else we can do to support them in, living in the society that they're living in.
I agree.
Yeah, let's start doing 4 pre-starts a day. It's not that.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
I'm at this point right now.
Yeah.
We need to, as an industry, start saying, why not? Why not get a Gen Z on the board?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. You look at the boards, and it's great. They've got all this experience and loads of governance, risk, project delivery and management and all that intel. But we've got Gen Z with an innovative, creative, new frame, new lens.
And Gen Zs have been taught to question as well because they've had information their entire lives. So Gen Zs go, almost the first thing whenever you say to a Gen Z is, blah, 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 blah. They'll go, but what if? Or why not? Or, because, if you've had social media your entire life, then you have to learn how to question things more often. It just becomes part of you.
And you've naturally got that curious mindset and that ability to research and, a thirst for knowledge. Yeah. So you've had that ability, and then that gives you the opportunity to question some of the we've always done it that way ways of thinking as well. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about in terms of when you're talking about flexibility, it's funny. So when we look at diversity, everyone goes, okay, we've got to get out to the schools. I'm not saying we don't. I speak at schools. We've got to get out to schools, get more people on the bus. We've got to be selling it. Yes. But the reality also is it's systemic change. It's systemic change to shift the industry to make it more appealing to the Gen Z generation that I can see as well. So it's you don't want to be bringing everybody in and then going, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And they're like, I don't like these hours.
No.
I don't really feel that the company I work for cares about me and there's not an alignment of values. All that sort of stuff as well is really important. So I love what you're talking about there around let's think about shifting the industry now and making some key changes to make it more appealing too.
Exactly. And I think something that's come in recently is, that concept around the psychological hazards and psychological safety assessments. And, workplaces are now, liable for people's psychological safety, which is awesome. But when we've done that, we've brought in a risk assessment and we start ticking off, just like how we manage, slips, trips and falls on site. It's like,
it's a bit weird.
Is this person tired? How is their home life?
It's like, I'm not sure if that's what they meant, guys.
And what an opportunity lost. Construction has a huge mental health crisis. And when, we got an opportunity for innovation, the first thing we did was applied our existing systems, tools and processes that we know work for slips, trips and falls to something going on inside someone's brain.
I can see what you're saying there. Yeah.
And I mean, how frustrating. How do you go to those schools and say, come pick up the tools? Like, we need more sparkies, we need more plumbers, we need more carpenters. How do you go say that when half of the sparkies, are crying in the toilet? Like,
100%.
How do you go tell that to the young people when half of the plumbers, have committed suicide? Like,
yeah. And I think you hit on a really deep issue here. And I even think it goes beyond the contractors to the clients and the government. We want to see change where we are doing more best practice models, more collaborative contracting, putting less pressure. I mean, if you're dealing with 1% to 3% margins, how much, so we talk about psychological safety of employees.
Yeah.
How much psychological safety do you feel that sometimes these leaders have when they're dealing with 1% to 3% margin and all this pressure to make money and we're seeing companies go broke, not making money, leaving? It has to start with the government and the clients. We cannot and can no longer look at this industry as going, oh, well, they just need to be more flexible with their stuff, which is absolutely key. It's like, well, we need to set the framework. We're going to go into the golden decade, next 10 years.
Yeah.
I think this is just the time is now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were CEO of Engineers Without Borders.
Youth Without Borders.
Youth Without Borders, sorry.
It's all good. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, quickly, what you learned in that experience that has shaped you as well as an engineer.
Youth Without Borders deliver great programs for underprivileged students, getting them into STEM. So one of their projects is called the Spark Engineering Camp, which I was involved in through university. And then I moved on to the role of CEO, and I actually led that organization through COVID as well. So most of it was, led through kind of, my computer at home.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I think I learned a lot about managing risk as a young person very early on. I think I was 20 when I was,
Huge.
CEO of Youth Without Borders. I love volunteer organizations, and I love that they, enable you to try different things and, try new skills. And I loved Youth Without Borders' mission and cause around kind of, inspiring that next generation to get in and ensuring that we're getting a diverse representation of people in. And one of the founder of Youth Without Borders, Yasmin, she has this great quote, which is around it's around the concept of like all those charities that we all support throughout the entire year. And the thing that, drove her to start Youth Without Borders was, well, what if we all just pooled all our money and resources and really actually got down to solving the problem? It was applying that really engineering mindset to the issue rather than this, I've got competitive advantage over them, all of this stuff. And it's true. If we did pool all of our resources in the entire world, we probably would find sustainable solutions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We probably, would solve the flexibility. We probably would solve psychological safety.
Yeah. So many ideas that you've got. I mean, I think somebody just needs to sign you up to a board position. Yeah. So reach out if you're keen. I'll find some time. So look,
I've got plenty of energy.
You really do. And I always love our chats. I love it. Yeah. Another question I have, which I always ask, and I think it's fitting when you're talking about engineers, Youth Without Borders, right? And the work that you did there. What makes you feel like you're home?
Ooh. My dog.
What's your dog's name?
Yeah, Cola.
Cola. What kind of dog's Cola?
She's a ex-racing greyhound.
Oh, so, does she do the greyhound lean when you're walking?
Yeah.
It's my favourite.
Yeah,
they're adorable. Okay.
I think, the beach makes me feel very at home. But I think above all, I'm quite connected, and you'll see this with Gen Zs and their run clubs that have started. We're very connected to our communities and our environments and really making a difference at that smaller scale because we've learned that's what we can control.
Yeah, absolutely.
During COVID, that was the only thing we could control. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so I think, being surrounded by my community and, people that have, the same values as me, but even people that don't have the same values as me, being surrounded by nature, hanging out with my dog. That's what makes me feel at home.
It's all something we could do a little more of, to be honest, like contributing to the human need to contribute, spending more time in nature. It's all good for your dopamine, your oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all that dose. You get that from all of those things. So I feel like Gen Z is onto something, as are you.
Especially because most Gen Zs will now be working behind computers. So we have less and less chance to kind of, spend that time in nature.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good example. Now I've got a fun round now, which is called the Rocket Round, where I ask a few questions, like shooting a rocket. Coffee or wine?
Ooh.
Thought you said Gen Z doesn't drink.
I'm an older Gen Z. I'm closer to the millennials.
I don't count.
Wine.
Okay, cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Yeah. What's your favorite holiday destination?
Ooh. Too many to name. I love anywhere I can do water sports. Yeah.
Awesome.
So either the beach or a river or
super relaxing. Well, what kind of water sports?
I'm a world champion in whitewater rafting.
Of course you are. How did we not cover that? I'm just slipping that in there.
Stay tuned for the next podcast.
Stay tuned when we talk more about her whitewater rafting adventures.
So I'm a world champion in whitewater rafting. I peaked when I was 16. So, yeah.
I don't know. I would say you're still peaking now.
No, I peaked when I was 16 until that board position, Yeah.
The board position. You all heard it here first. Yeah. And what podcast do you listen to?
I'm a huge fan of Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Love a good podcast. And the other question I had was, I've completely forgotten, and this is probably going to go into bloopers. What's the legacy that you want to impart for the work that you've been doing?
I would love to, deliver sustainable solutions and enact meaningful change.
That's just that,
just
just
that.
don't in your spare time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carina, for coming on for the guest. I've had a lot of fun and learnt a lot as well. And I just really appreciate you taking the time. Please, if you are interested in chatting with Carina, connect with her on LinkedIn. How else can we learn more about you, learn more about what you're involved in?
I'm Gen Z, so I'm all on LinkedIn. We're just social media is our best friend. We're really good at it.
Absolutely.
We don't have a website or anything. It's a one-stop shop, my LinkedIn profile.
I giggle so much when I see people, and particularly in my industry, you'll see recruiters going, why are people on LinkedIn? You don't need to be on LinkedIn, and all these people like typing. And I just sort of giggle and kind of go, well, Gen Z's there. Yeah. So if you want to communicate and keep out there, you guys are on the Gen Z, you're on the Gen Z is on the LinkedIn and on the podcasts.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for coming on as a guest.
Thank you for having
As
me.
always, like, subscribe, rate, review. Also, what I've heard a lot of you doing lately, which I love, is reaching out personally to the guests and telling them what you got from the episode. Every guest that gets that loves it, and they tell me about it all very excitedly. So don't be scared to reach out. People that want to contribute and come on this podcast love hearing what you've learned, and share the episode with a friend that needs to hear it. Thanks so much. If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action, apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.